Hey, it's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. Joining me on the show today is Vicki Sinclair, who is a tiny houser that lives on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland. And in this conversation, we talk all about Vicki's story of losing her home and almost everything that she owned in an earthquake in New Zealand, to how she transitioned into tiny house living and turned her life around. The must-have features in Vicki's custom-designed tiny home. We also talked about some tiny mishaps and what Vicki would do differently. It includes a composting toilet, by the way. How Vicki found her parking space and what it's like to live in a tiny house community, and lots more. It was really great to hear Vicki's story, get to know a bit more about her, and it's very inspiring to know of the challenges that she came from to then creating this dream tiny life for herself and also working for a tiny house building company that built her home. So let's get to the show and onto this tiny house conversation with Vicki. Hi, Vicki. Welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me.
So, Vicki, you're originally from New Zealand and you live in a beautiful tiny home on the sunny coast of Queensland. And you also work for LJM Tiny Homes. And I have to say, and I think I've told you this before, your tiny house is probably one of the most beautiful and one of my most favorite that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of tiny homes. I just love this. Yeah, I just love the style and the unique touches and even the color schemes that you've included. And, you're sitting in front of this really divine looking wallpaper. But I think a lot of people are like, where did you get that from? Including me. So I would love to dive into, all about your tiny house and your experiences of living tiny, but you also have a really unique story of how you got here. So if you're able to just start by sharing with us, how is it that you came to Australia to live in a tiny home? How did you come across tiny houses in the first place, and where did your story start?
I'm not sure when I first came across tiny houses. I feel like it's been on my radar for probably 15 years. Yeah, I lived in America for a while when I was 21, and I lived out in the woods in a small area at certain times, and there were other sort of cabins and rustic ways to live out there in the woods. It was a little bit rugged, and certainly not like a town or a village even, like it was proper rugged. And so I loved that. I loved living in a one-room cabin sort of thing and, cooking on the fire and that sort of thing. And that was just sort of holiday. So it didn't sort of occur to me that I would ever do that type of thing in real life for like actual living. So it's always been on the radar, I think. Moving to Australia wasn't a plan. I'd been here before and lived in different places, just again, sort of traveling. I'm a bit of a traveler and adventurer and searcher. I'm always sort of searching for the next adventure and fun, beautiful place to be. So I'd obviously been to Australia a few times before and even lived here. But I was living in New Zealand at the time, and I had a house there, and I was kind of planning not on moving. And we had the earthquakes in Christchurch, and that really changed the course of my life in a pretty massive way. Basically, the house was destroyed. My parents' house was destroyed. My work was destroyed. So I had no longer had a job, no longer had anywhere to live. And it became pretty clear pretty fast that this wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was going to take a long time to get sorted. A lot of people died. The whole city was decimated. There was just... Wow. There was no water, there was no electricity. A lot of people didn't have roofs over their head. There was not going to be a quick answer to this. And on top of that, you've still got a mortgage to pay. So for me, I was lucky in that I didn't have kids at the school. I didn't have anyone that I had to be there for. So, obviously I stayed with my parents for the first week. We were all sort of sleeping in the one bedroom that was relatively okay. And lots of aftershocks throughout the night and days, and it was a pretty terrifying spot to be in. But I also knew that I had to earn money because I had my mortgage to pay, and I'd not long been travelling in Australia, so I had no savings at all. Luckily, I had a really great friend in Sydney, in Australia, and I got in touch with her and I just said, can I sleep on your couch? Like, I think I need to come and work there. And the only reason I picked Sydney was A, because my best mate was there, but B, it paid a lot more money. And so I needed somewhere that I could earn enough money to send the cash home to pay the mortgage and be able to afford to live somewhere else. And I couldn't see myself being able to do that anywhere in New Zealand. It's just the wages just aren't good enough for effectively doubling my income is what I kind of needed to do. And so that's where Sydney came in. And I worked in a law firm, in the legal side of things, in a top tier law firm. Like I stayed on my friend's couch for a couple of months and then moved into a share house when I could afford to do that. And then eventually got my own house and was able to choose, flatmates to live with, and met some amazing people that we're still friends now, so that was lovely. And eventually, after, I was there for 10 years, I think, a bit over 10 years after the earthquakes. By the time my house actually took 6 years to rebuild. So it was fully insured. And of course, you expect it to be rebuilt through insurance, which it was. But when the whole city is under construction, it just takes time. And so for that first 6 years, I had to send money back. I had to redesign the house over the phone. Like I did all that virtually because I was working here and I couldn't fly back all the time for different meetings. So yeah, it was a really long, stressful process getting that sorted. And then by the time it was finally sold, or by the time it was built and ready to move back into, I had a life in Australia and I just didn't want to move back there. So I sold that house and I was still living in Sydney, and I'd sort of toyed with the idea of moving to different parts of Australia again, but until the house was paid for and sold off, I had to earn a decent amount of money to be able to pay the mortgage and survive here as well. So it was after that 6 years I started getting itchy feet again, and I was like, what do I want to do with my life? But it's really hard when you earn a pretty decent wage as a single person to just be like, I'm just going to go traveling again, or, it was a really big decision sort of to try and work out, how do I survive in Australia on this good wage and a job that I enjoy, but also still travel and things like that. So I was sort of toying with a few different ideas. And at one point I thought, I'm going to build a tiny house and have it as a holiday home and put it somewhere near Sydney. And then I was just like, that's not really what I want to do. And I was still sort of toying with the idea. And then sort of COVID happened. And I went to the 2020 Tiny House Carnival in Sydney, and which is the first time I met Bryce, actually, and saw a whole bunch of tiny houses there. And I was just like, this is absolutely the direction I want to keep going in. And then I think the weekend after that was when lockdown started. So I was then working from home for the better part of 18 months, and I lived in a studio apartment and it was small. And I just thought, what am I doing? Life's too short. This isn't the way I want to live my life for much longer. And so I had already been researching tiny houses and where to live and places like that. I'd been to this area one time for a 3-day holiday, and I thought, that looks nice. I want to move there. And so, yeah, and I'd been researching different tiny house companies, and I thought I knew which builder I wanted to work with. I'd visited a few different factories a few times, and I'd seen products and things like that. And then I've sort of finally narrowed it down to a favorite, and then went and met them, and I just didn't feel the vibe. And I was really thrown by that. I'd done a lot of research. I'd contacted some of their previous clients, and it seemed fine. But then just for me, the vibe wasn't there. And I was really thrown. I didn't know what to do. Because I thought I'd researched every tiny house company in Australia and I thought I'd found the right one, and I didn't. I hadn't. And then somebody said to me, "Why don't you ring LJM?" And I said, "Who are LJM Tiny Homes?" And they were like, "They have this great company on the Sunshine Coast." And I'm like, "I'm already on the Sunshine Coast right now," because I'd gone up for the weekend to visit another builder. And so I met up with Joe that day, and I just thought, this is definitely the company I want to use to build my tiny house. And so that's kind of where it started from. And then I flew back to Sydney. There was a break in the lockdown for a very short period of time, and I managed to fly up and meet him in that time and then fly back again. I booked it in, it basically met him about a year before we started building ish, 10 months, I think. And so that's kind of how it started.
Wow. Such a fascinating story and so many interesting things you said in there. And I can imagine that when you go through an experience like you've gone through of where you've pretty much just lost everything and it's been traumatic and it's sort of turned your life upside down and it's made you go, okay, like, what am I actually doing? Did you find that it sort of made you even reassess, like, how is it that I actually want to spend my days and what do I want to have around me in my environment and just assessing all these different parts of your life? Did it make you sort of just look at life in a different way?
Very differently. Pre-earthquakes, I was living in a small but regular house. It wasn't massive, it was 2 bedrooms, but I spent all of my time renovating, making it beautiful, doing different gardening things, spending a lot of money on beautiful things. And I was a real homebody still, but I spent a lot of money, trying to pay down the mortgage as much as I could and buying pretty things and making it nice. And then literally within a minute, it's all destroyed. Like, it's gone. Everything inside it is gone. It's just, there's nothing. And so you walk out with a few clothes and, I came to Australia with, I think, $300 odd and a bag of clothes, and that's all I had. And it was quite freeing in a way because I had everything I owned with me. And it took me a long time to want to start buying things for an apartment or things like that. Like, I live much more minimally now, and I don't spend things on lots of knickknacks, and I don't have, good glasses to use for special occasions and things like that. I just use them all the time. Like, everything is just a now thing. It's not we'll keep that for the best and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely changed me for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I don't know, even though it was obviously really not a nice experience to go through, that maybe on some level it was like a kind of reset because you said, you had nothing except for a few clothes and then you're not even really felt drawn to fill all that space again, up in your life. And I could also imagine that it would just kind of make you think like, well, what is it that I actually need anyway? Like, do I need all this stuff? Do I need all this space? What is it that truly makes me happy? How do I want to spend my days? So yeah, I think that might be a common sort of human universal thing that often we go through challenging times. All of us have some kind of challenging experience or multiple throughout our lives. But when we're able to sort of, can be easier said than done, depending on the circumstances, but sort of pick ourselves up again. We have this fresh perspective on life and we sort of start to follow a path that might be more aligned to, the way that we want to live and what we've always dreamed of, or what we might have put off for so long because we were so busy having to pay those bills and the mortgage and all of that. It's like, it's actually really beautiful, what can come out of these struggles and these challenging times. And I feel like your story is definitely a beautiful example of that. And so it's just really great to hear about, where you came from and to see like where you are now, and you're thriving in a beautiful tiny house community on the sunny coast, and you're, living life on your own terms. You've been able to work for a really great tiny house company, which is obviously very aligned in just your lifestyle in general, right? There's kind of like not such a separation between the two. It's like it's integrated into your life. You must just eat, sleep and dream tiny houses, because you're really involved in that space and you live it. So I'm curious what that's like for you, actually sort of living it and also working in it and helping
Um,
other people too.
I think it really helps with the designing of tiny houses and helping people understand what they're going to need and what will work and what won't work in their tiny house. All of our houses that we build are totally custom, full custom. So everyone has their own idea of, same as I did with this house, like this is what I wanted and it's absolutely exactly what I wanted. But practically some things, don't necessarily work as well as other things. So I think it really helps me living in a tiny house and having built one from the ground up for myself and then have the experience of actually living in it, what can work and what can't work sort of thing. I think that's really, really helpful for me to be able to pass that information on to people if they want to know that sort of thing. Something else that I found, years ago, people sort of understood that moving into a tiny house meant downsizing their life and being a little bit more minimalistic and getting rid of a lot of things. And I feel like the last couple of years, people have really changed in their attitude, and there's not as much of the wanting to downsize and minimalize things. People are wanting bigger tiny houses all the time and wider and longer and 3 bedrooms and baths and all this sort of thing, which is great on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's only so much you can do within the realms of a tiny house footprint, So I think it's definitely a different conversation now than it was 2 years ago when we're building new houses. There's definitely a change in the type of house people are expecting or wanting for themselves now.
Absolutely. I've noticed that as well. And I know it's something that came up when I was talking to Joe on the show recently. It's a whole new demographic of people are coming in too. And then seeing a lot more 8.4s, 9.5, 6 longs, all of that, when I think for such a long time it was maybe like the 7 meter tiny home, 7.2 or whatever it was a very common one, even for like small families or couples or something.
Yeah,
So
mine
yeah,
is
you're right.
7.2.
Yeah, exactly. And mine's 6, right? But I think like if I could do it again, I'd probably go a bit longer. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I think it's also heartening that it's crossing into a demographic of people, or it's making it this type of housing option accessible for many more types of people. So it's really heartening to see. And I'm sure you come across where you see the sort of change that's happened over the years in many different ways, including that. And I'd love to, so you mentioned you've got a 7.2 meter tiny home.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to know just a bit about your home in general. So what were some of the main, you know, non-negotiables you had to have? You're like, I know this is what I want to have in my tiny home, whether it's to do with the layout, whether it's to do with features or anything that you want to share, like your personal touches and
Mm-hmm.
must-haves.
For me, had to have live timber or timber bench tops. I don't think I would have built a house if I couldn't do that. And I don't really know why that is, other than I just love them. I've never lived with them before. I'd never lived anywhere where I had that. But I love timber and nature. And I really, really, really wanted real natural timber bench tops. Something else I wanted was I wanted a smaller than usual shower. So my shower is only 800 by 800. And the reason for that is when I lived in Sydney, I paid a lot of money for rent for a studio apartment. The shower in that was only 700 by 700. And like a regular shower base is 900 by 900. And they're not, a lot of people go bigger at, 900 by 1200 or bigger. And for me, I'm just like, I'm in there for like not long every day, just getting wet, running around in a circle and then getting out. Like it's not something for me, that I need to spend a lot of space on. So that was quite difficult at the time to source an 800 by 800 shower base. They're not very common because the standard is 9 by 9. So that was something that was a little bit tricky at the time. And also the shower walls. I really wanted tiles. I had all these inspirational photos of these amazing tiles and stuff like that. And, become a parent, obviously, can't really do tiles for weight and for moving them. They, might chip or crack or whatever. I could have had them installed on site, but I just sort of thought I might need to move at some point. I don't want to break everything in here. So I'm quite happy with the lightweight option that we found. But that was another thing for me, was the shower. The kitchen bench top and the shower were the main things for me.
Yeah. And you've also got, so what about the color scheme? Because you've got like a very unique color scheme, and there's like some copper in there too. And it actually all just really works beautifully. And then sort of, because you've got such natural surroundings with the trees outside too and the windows and things, like it all just, yeah, it's like you've brought the outside in almost literally, you know?
Yeah, it is. It's worked out really well, actually. I went for the green kitchen cabinets a long time ago. I'd never seen anyone do green before, but it was just something I really wanted to do. I think a few people thought I was a little bit crazy, but I've always liked doing things differently. In my house, actually, in New Zealand, I painted the bathroom a very dark brown. So most bathrooms are white and bright. And I just used to stagger in there in the morning in the light and like burn my retinas. And I'm like, I'm not doing this. So I went for a very dark bathroom with obviously the white bath and the white shower walls and
Yeah.
stuff. So it wasn't, dark. But so it was kind of the same thing here. I didn't want to do the same thing that everyone else does. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So yeah, the green, the copper lamps, the pendant lights in the kitchen, they were interesting. I was just wandering around in Sydney, going to secondhand stores and sort of retro furniture stores and stuff, which I love doing, just wandering around the op shops and having a dig around. And I never usually buy anything. I don't know why. I just like looking at all the stuff. And this day I walked under these lights, and they were hung up in the ceiling, and they were lit, and they were different colors because they had different color bulbs in them. But I had to have them. And I don't know why I had to have them. At that time, I probably got them 5 years before I started my build. I wasn't planning on building a tiny house then, and there was absolutely no reason to buy them. And I had to have them. So they were also a real teal blue, and the inside was copper. And they were also not, they were pretty expensive for someone who didn't need them, and I had nowhere to put them. And it just was a ridiculous purchase. But it was one of these things that I loved them, and I had to have them. So when I originally planned the house, I thought that they would go, that's where the copper accents for the house sort of came in, because I knew I wanted them. But I thought that they would go quite well as the teal light with the green kitchen. And then once the house was on site, I realized that the teal was not going to look any good at all with the green. So I actually just went and bought some paint and painted them myself, and sanded them and painted them and sanded them and painted them. I had no idea if it was going to work. I didn't know if it was going to look any good, but luckily it all came together, and phew, because that could have been a disaster.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how the copper lights came. And then because they were there, I got copper handles for the kitchen as well. And that just sort of all tied it in. And then the bench tops, because when we ordered the bench tops, they're Tasmanian blackwood, and there was no real way of knowing exactly what color tones they would be. So they could have been, sort of very different colors. But I was lucky enough, I was able to drive up the road a couple of hours and go to the warehouse where they were milled and see the timber in its raw state, and help the guys pick out which plank would go where, and see it there. So that was really cool as well. So I could get an idea of, what sort of tones it was going to be, so that I could pick the flooring. I actually took the flooring samples up with me to try and figure out which flooring to choose, because I didn't know what color it was going to be, so
Yeah.
that was kind of a fun part as well.
Yeah, it's so fun being so involved in the actual design and from the bottom up, right? Because it's something that I found super fun too and exciting, because it's a very new experience. But I definitely love, yeah, like the color schemes. I'm right there with you with the timber. I think there's just something beautiful about, especially once you finish it as well. There's
Yeah.
something just so beautiful and striking about that, whether it's a bench or, stairs or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And I'm also really curious for you, because how long have you been living in your tiny roughly now?
About 2.5 years nearly, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So now that you've sort of been there for around 2.5 years, I'm
Mhm.
just curious, is there anything, well, now that you've lived in it, and you kind of you've seen how you use the space. Is there anything that you do differently, or is there any like small shifts that you might make in terms of where things are situated or the layout of things or anything like that?
No, actually, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I did upgrade. I did have a different type of toilet originally, mainly because of funds at the time. And also, so I had a separate villa, which is basically a self-contained toilet that you just put inside the house. It does have a liquid hose that goes away out of the house, but basically the rest of it's contained. So I'd have to empty that every week or two, whatever. I can't quite remember now, but yeah. I thought that I'd be okay with that for longer than I was. And eventually I just got really just sort of sick of the maintenance with that, just because you did have to empty it quite frequently. So I've upgraded to a Clivus Multrum. So it's got the composting bucket outside now. So that lasts a
Yeah.
lot longer. There's a lot less maintenance with that, which has been great. So probably, I would have done that sooner if I'd known that would become more of the issue that it was. The toilet was fine. It was just I got lazy and sort of sick of dealing with it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And for one person, it's not so bad, but I can imagine like with four people, you'd have to do it empty it even more often. But
Yeah.
other than that, I haven't regretted anything. No, there's nothing I can think of that I'd like to change, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great because I know for me, I'm there with you with the composting toilet. So if I could do it differently, I will eventually. I've also got a self-contained. But it's not one of the separate ones. It's a Wandering Wally, which was from Anthony from Water Wally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a urine diverter and everything. And yeah, it's about a once a week emptying process for me. I think for me, it's not so much the emptying that is the thing. The urine diverter is a bit annoying. Like that whole thing of, like it changes the way you're using the toilet a little bit. And I think it's like can be very strange when you have guests over and like it's not a big deal, but I'm just
Yeah.
like, actually, it would be so much easier to have a split system like what you described, which I will do next time.
Yeah.
Where the only difference would be that they just don't flush it and then they just put some compost material in it and then that's it. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, the whole urine diverter thing for me is like a little bit annoying. That's the main part. So I definitely feel you there.
And I wanted to
Yeah.
utilize my liquids in the garden as well. So I was collecting the urine in a bucket. So that had to be
Yeah.
emptied into the compost. And
Yeah.
that's not a pleasant job. Like if anyone's ever had to do that, man, that's not fun. So yeah, I was really happy to see the back of that, to be honest.
Yeah. Was it fairly easy to change it over? Just get like a plumber or something to do that, or
Yes.
someone
Yeah.
handy? Yeah. Or yeah. Okay.
Nothing. The only obviously they have to like cut a hole in your floor to
Drill
put
on the
the
floor.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd have to check where your trailer is. Obviously, like if you're
Yeah.
needed to put it right where the chassis was, well, you'd be in trouble. But luckily, where I had wanted mine, it was fine. And so yeah, I had room under the house and everything. So actually, there is
Yeah.
something else that I would have done differently that I've just remembered.
It's time to take a pause from today's episode. Have you found any kind of value, inspiration, insights, entertainment, or education from listening to Tiny House Conversations? There's a simple way you can support the show, which I'll share with you in a moment. A big reason why I create the show is to serve you and to help make tiny living easier and more accessible to people. You may not even realize this, but bringing you the show week after week includes many, many hours of research, interviewing, production, editing, creating video clips, show notes, graphics, and much more, which I do as a labor of love. Not to mention podcast hosting and recording software fees, the website, and more. So to help make it sustainable for me to keep the podcast going long term and bringing you more awesome guests, tiny tips, experiences, stories, behind the scenes, expert information, and more, you can support the show by buying me a coffee. Just head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/coffee. And if you believe in reciprocity like I do and you want to say thanks and pay it forward, thank you so much in advance if you choose to support Tiny House Conversations in this way. All right, let's get back to the episode.
I would definitely want to have my tiny house on a concrete pad
Oh,
just for the longevity of a house. Like over time, there's a lot of weight in a tiny house, and it definitely does sort of settle into the ground. And so concrete pad was definitely a must for me. And I was lucky enough that where I've put my house, there was already a concrete pad here. What I didn't realize at the time, or I just didn't know at the time, but my front wheels or front stabilizing arms are actually in front of the concrete pad on the ground. It wasn't, when it was put on the pad, it wasn't moved back far enough. So that's one thing I would change. So actually the wheels are on a concrete pad and the back stabilizing arms are on a concrete pad, but the front ones are over the front of the pad, which I don't know why we did that in the beginning. So that's
yeah.
something I'd change. I would have just moved it back half a meter and
Yeah.
settled in there. So it's fine. It's totally fine because most of it's on the concrete pad, but that's something I would change.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip, that whole stabilizing and then taking the pressure off the tires and all, yeah, because especially if you're going to be in a spot for, a few years or something at least,
Yeah,
there definitely has to have that sort of equal weight distribution and all of that is really important.
definitely.
Um,
Once it starts
yeah,
getting sort of uneven, especially like the short way between the wheels, it can twist, it can buckle, it can cause leaking in the roof, which then can cause damage down the walls and stuff like that. Like
yeah,
it's just a road you don't want to go down if you can help it. I definitely
yeah.
would recommend a concrete pad for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's a great tip. And I think especially if someone either, well, if you own the land or if you know you're going to be there for a certain amount of time or whatever, and not just like a year or something, I think, yeah, definitely good investment. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, so you live amongst a tiny house community, and I'm just curious, like, how you found your parking space, because that's one of the most common things. You guys probably hear it as well from
Yeah.
your clients of,
Yeah.
okay, well, I want to live in a tiny house, but where do I park it? How do I do it? So how did you find that process? And also, what is it like living in a tiny community?
How I found it was quite interesting because I was still in lockdown in Sydney at the time. The house was well underway as far as planning and that goes. So I was about 2 or 3 months out from needing the parking spot. And I basically joined the Facebook community groups for the areas that I wanted to live in. And I just put an ad up. I put a photo of myself and I just put a bit of a blurb saying, this is what I'm doing. And do you have any land that you want to make a little bit of passive income from? And I put it on, I think, about 10 or 12 different sites. And I sort of did them all at the same time. Within 24 hours, I had over 50 messages and I just could not keep up. So I took
Wow.
them all down because I was just like, I can't, this is 24 hours and I've got more than 50 people to respond to. So
Yeah.
yeah, I found that really, really fantastic. Obviously, not all of them are suitable. They weren't all somewhere I wanted to live. I narrowed it down to, I think, 5. And then when I was able to come into Queensland from New South Wales and meet the people, I chose somewhere. And interestingly, it wasn't here, it was somewhere else.
Oh,
And the
okay.
lady was really nice. And she also already had a fully self contained studio on the land. And I actually lived in that but while my tiny house was being built. And I was going to put my house on her land, but she just didn't have it ready. And so she was going to cut a clearing in the woods and concrete pad it and put electricity and water and everything. And 2 weeks out, she hadn't started. And so I was really concerned that it just wasn't going to be ready. And so I had to sort of go back to the drawing board and find somewhere else. And so I went back to the emails that I had had all those months ago. And this had been my second option. And so I came around and met with the people who lived here. And yeah, so it all sort of happened really fast. We just got on really well. And I was so lucky that it was really interesting because I messaged and I said, I know it's been sort of 4 months since we spoke, and the likelihood of this position still being available is low, but the land that I had has fallen through. And they came back and said, we took it off the market because we just felt that it was meant to be for you. So we hadn't filled the spot.
Oh,
So I
Yeah.
was just like, wow, this is kind of meant to be. And so I came in and met them, and yeah, so and that's sort of, and then 2 weeks later the house was here. So yeah, it's an interesting path. Like things have just worked out pretty well. Like it feels like I'm on the right track because things like that have kind of happened all the way through. Something that I
Yeah.
thought was okay has fallen through at the last minute, and it's turned out way better anyway. Like meeting Joe at LJM Tiny Homes instead of where I thought I was going to build with, and this piece of land and this community, and like it's really nice. I always envisaged living in a tiny house, very remote, with no neighbors, and just being able to look out and sort of, for some reason, I'm always up. So I'm looking down a hill over a valley, and there's water down there, and there's horses, and it's just very rural. And then that's what I always thought I wanted. And then when I got here, I realized that after COVID and being locked inside a studio apartment in concrete walls for the better part of 18 months by myself, that would have been horrendous just to be somewhere off by myself. This community is exactly what I needed. And it's been great. Like we all have our own space and we don't, necessarily see each other every day. But if we want to, we can. And it's just so nice to, wave out all the time as you're going past and have people wandering past and calling in for a cup of tea. And it's just really nice.
Yeah, sounds like a good balance between having your own space and being respectful of each other's space, but then also if you want to connect or
Yeah,
even just have the peace of mind that there are people around or, you can help each other or whatever it might be.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
also sort of like-minded people too, like living in a place that,
very
um,
much. Yeah.
yeah, so that sounds really beautiful. And
We have a group
yeah,
chat that everyone's in, and
oh,
someone will be like, can somebody help me with my lawnmower, or can I borrow somebody's
yeah,
this, or does anybody have a lemon, or things like that happens all the
yeah,
time. And so that
yeah.
people are popping in and out borrowing stuff, and it's really nice. And the other funny thing is everyone has their own way of announcing that they're on your property. So nobody just comes to the door and knocks, because you never know what somebody might be doing, if you're not expecting a visitor. So, one person rings the bell on their push bike. So you hear a little ding ding and to go outside because he's out there, or one of the girls does a little whistle and somebody else sort of yells out. And so it's really cool. Like everyone's got their own little announcement that they're on your property.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
I
fun.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun atmosphere and a warm atmosphere. And it just reminded me what you described there of like you having the group chat and, everyone's helping each other out, or maybe you're trading food or people are growing things and you're sharing with others. And it reminds me of, I feel like that's what it would have been like such a long time ago when we were living in like, villages right together and close by, and still in some parts of the world. I think, but I guess in our Western sort of culture, it's become very like individualistic and can be a bit isolating. And so I think to sort of have this community essence and this community vibe where you can sort of bring those principles back to just being there for each other and sharing, and yeah, it sounds really, really beautiful. So
Yeah.
I love that,
It's
and I think
nice.
it's important to also have, our own space at the same time, and so that we can have the best of both worlds. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's really awesome. And I'm curious, so now that you have been living in your tiny for, couple 2.5 years or so, is there anything that has been, I don't know, unexpectedly challenging, or there are any sort of tiny mishaps that happen? You know how you hear about things that happen to people, like, their generator turns off in the middle of the night and it's like, they got to get up and turn it, like, or anything like that. Like, have you had anything that's sort of challenging happen to you while you've been there?
Not so much like that. We are on bore water, so there's a
Yeah.
pump that runs the water for showers and things like that. And we're also in a bit of a flood zone, so sometimes it
Yeah.
floods. So the
Yeah.
houses are all dry, but the road in and out is flooded.
Yeah.
So once that's flooded, also the power is usually off for the water. So we have to, you can't shower and things like that and use the water. So that's one little sort of challenge. Another challenge that we had the other night, which I hadn't happened before. So I've got this newish toilet, and the Clovis mulch room has a fan taking any smells away, and I've got that sort of flued up the house so it goes over the ceiling, over the roof of the house. We had a known power outage the other night, and we knew it was going off. They were replacing a big transformer thing down the road. So that was fine. But after the power had been off for about half an hour, I went into the bathroom to wash my face, and I realized how very, very good that fan was when it was working, because my goodness, it was not working and it was not pleasant. And I was like, we're only like half an hour in. I've probably got another 14 hours with no fan. So I actually ended up cling filming the toilet because I just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
another little challenge. And, in hindsight, I know now I can get a battery backup for that. And so I'm arranging for that because that wasn't fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was something like when you just said about the generator and stuff. I don't have a generator, but, yeah, definitely would like a little battery operated thing. And
Yeah,
it is good here
absolutely.
as a community when we do have flooding and things like that. Usually the power is on still, but sometimes it isn't. But we all can look out for each other and share food and stuff like that. So if everyone's sort of flooded in and nobody can leave, it's kind of nice to, every now and then we'll all go to somebody's house for a cake or, something like that. So that's nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah. And I can relate to you with the composting toilet fan because it was a different situation, but there was probably, I think the fan was out for maybe 2 days, and it related to the way that the actual plumbers installed the vent pipe. And then when we had flooding here, the water came all the way through the pipe and it damaged the fan housing and the electric. So I had to actually get a new part sent from the composting toilet manufacturer. And so I know exactly what you mean, like for a couple of days. And then because they hadn't done the thing properly with the flue pipe above the roof line, there's also bugs and stuff coming in, and it was just not good. So that was like, I totally feel you. I was like, that was, horrible, right?
Yeah, it's just something I'd never considered. Like, and I didn't, you kind of can hear the fan going and you kind of think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've never noticed any odors or anything with the toilet, but I also didn't really comprehend quite how well the fan was working until it stopped. And then I was like, wow, that thing works really well.
Totally. And it's actually such a simple concept, right? That it's just this like really small fan. It's nothing fancy, but it's just the fact that it's going 24/7, and then you've got, the pipe that goes up over the roof. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely feel you on that. Yeah.
I'm almost considering buying a new pump, like a new fan, just ready, just in case it ever breaks.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want to have to deal with that for like 3 or 4 days waiting for a replacement.
Yeah. I know. Oh, goodness. Tiny, tiny life. And I'm also curious. So, are there some lessons or key takeaways that you sort of have learned or come across since you've been living tiny that maybe you didn't know before, or just any kind of, key lessons over the last couple of years and a half since you've been there?
Probably just more observations for me that they might not be the same for other people. But like for me, my sleeping loft it's just straight across. I don't have a drop down walkway or a standing bit in there at all. I don't have any storage up there. It's just somewhere I just go up and I crawl into bed, and it's kind of like a little cocoon. And I just love that because it's very simple and it's calming. It's a sleeping space, and that's what it's for. For me, I love that. And a lot of people, when they come and visit or when they see the house, they're like, oh, but don't you want, cupboards up here and things like that? And I really don't. So for me, that's something that I think that might be different for me than for most people. Like it doesn't seem that common. It sort of occurred to me halfway through the process, because I was kind of having a bit of a stress out, is it doesn't have to be forever. Like I'm a bit of I do lots of different adventures, and I was like, man, this is a really massive commitment, and what if I don't like it at the farm for the rest of my life? And I was like, but I can sell it. I can move it. I can rent it out. I can build another one. Like it's not like set in stone. It's not the end. Like it's just the beginning or a path, a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I love that you said that because I've had that same realization and that same lesson too. That's actually absolute gold. It's really simple, but a lot of
Yeah.
people come up against that because it's such a big commitment. You're investing a lot of money. You're moving onto someone else's property. It doesn't have to be forever,
No.
and you just adapt. You just adapt to whatever you need to do in the moment, just like we do with everything else in life. You
Yeah.
kind of just cross that bridge when it comes to it, which
Exactly.
is
It's just
exactly
it's
what.
a chapter in your book, right? Like it's,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
might be 4 chapters long, or it might just be one, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, totally.
And another thing I've noticed actually is how time consuming gardening can be. Like, I've got a lot of lawn to mow and a lot of gardening to keep under control. And I've found that quite challenging too, just because I'm quite busy. And I don't know if you can hear it now, but it's raining now. And the ground is often too wet to be able to mow. So when you get an opportunity, you've really got to get that grass mowed, or else it grows so fast and out of control too quickly. So that's another sort of little challenge that I've found.
I agree, and I've seen how that plays out here too. It's interesting with the cooler weather now down here. I am on the south coast of New South Wales. The growth has sort of started to slow, but a month ago you'd mow the lawn, you'd have to come back 5 days later, even 3 days later. You can see how much it's grown so quickly, and so keeping on top of that is tricky as well. So I
Yeah.
definitely feel you that, especially with working, because I work a lot online and stuff, and then also teach yoga and things like that. So yeah, I agree with you on that. There's so many beautiful, wonderful things about tiny life. And then there's also these like little things that no one tells you until you actually live it and then you experience and you go, oh yeah, it's just a different way of being. And I think I don't know if you can relate, but I feel like living on the land and living in this way rather than say how I've done for most of my life, like in an apartment or in a house or something, just a full appreciation for the rural life and what it takes to actually take care of the land and manage the land and all the things that go into that and yeah, it's beautiful to be out there, but it is a lot of work in a different way than say
Yeah.
in a regular
Yeah.
home.
And the same with
Yeah,
me. I, had small gardens or apartments with
yeah,
balconies, and I'd always had a lot of plants and things like that. But just the logistics of having time to do all of that has sort of
yeah,
surprised me a little bit. I love it. I love being out there and stuff, but it's also,
yeah.
it's something I have to do first thing in the morning because otherwise it's too hot in the sun to do it during the day and things like that. So it's an interesting thing that I've had to sort of work into my life as a ongoing task sort of thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it is really nice to be out there in the peace and quiet and, hands in the soil and all of that, having a bit more
I've got a
connection
couple
to,
of
yeah.
friendly butcher birds that I can kind of whistle in, and they'll
Ah,
come in and I'll give them worms out of the garden when I'm weeding or when I'm doing something. If they know
awesome.
that I'm going to be making a mess and giving them worms, they'll come in. So that's kind of fun as well. Got sort of
I love
families
that.
of kookaburras that live around, and the families of butcher birds and magpies, and there's a couple of like willy wagtails that come and say hello every day and stuff. So it's nice to have that opportunity to appreciate the bird life and the wildlife around here.
Absolutely. And just be so much more connected to nature. So Vicky, for anyone that's listening, we can put a link in the show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com for your episode on living big in a tiny house, because then people can actually see your beautiful home and a lot of the things we've been talking about today. But I know that from, I think, having your home on display there, that you've also had a lot of women reach out to you that have been inspired by your story and, maybe looking at tiny life for themselves. So are you able to just let us know a little bit about that and what you've been doing, when people reach out to you, or can people come to you and ask questions and things like that too, or
Yeah,
how are you helping
absolutely.
people? Yeah.
That was the real main reason that I wanted to do the episode with Bryce on living big in a tiny house. I just wanted to people like me to understand that it's possible. Like, I didn't have land either, and like my own land, and you know, you sometimes you've just got to take a leap of faith. And I just really wanted to literally inspire people to do that. And it's been so lovely getting all these messages from women saying that I literally have inspired them, and that's brilliant to me because I love living like this, and you can probably understand. It's great to be able to show people that you can do it and help them along their journey. I do get quite a bit of contact from people, especially single women and sometimes slightly older women, just wondering, they've come out of a marriage after 30, 40 years, the kids have gone, they've got very little savings, and they're pretty terrified because they're already in their 60s, and they're not sure how they're going to be secure and for their sort of last part of life. And just knowing that I've been able to inspire them to think about doing this, and knowing some of the women that have actually gone ahead and done it since then, it's just so lovely. It's great. That's like job done as far as I'm concerned. That was the whole goal. So it's been great.
Yeah. 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 It's so heartening to hear that because I think that just like I was saying to you before we started recording, I think what's really helpful for a lot of people is to hear other people's stories and to see how they've managed to make it happen. And even your particular story where you've gone from such a challenging time where you lost everything to kind of, the way that you're living now. And I know that a lot of people are struggling in many different ways. And as you said, whether it's relationship breakdowns and divorces, whether it's maybe losing a job or, whatever the situation is that showing people what's possible and giving them hope, I think is something that is so beautiful. And,
Yeah.
I'm heartened to sort of see you do that through your story and your tiny home, and even just the work that you're doing in the tiny house space, because I can imagine that you're talking to people all the time and helping them along, their journey and setting themselves up for tiny life. So that's really beautiful to hear. And if anyone wants to come and check out what you're doing, whether it's on social media, your website, do you want to just let them know those links or those handles of where they can come and connect or see what you're doing and all of that?
Yeah, that's another funny story. So my Instagram and the name of the house, it's the opposite of chaos. And
Oh, yes.
back in the 80s, I watched a movie. It was Cocktail with Tom Cruise. And in it, as part of this movie, he wrote the name of a future business that he wanted to open. And it was called Cocktails and Dreams. And he had that on a little piece of paper and he carried it around everywhere with him. At that time, I wrote down the opposite of chaos. I don't know why. It was the weirdest thing. And I've literally had that in my head and like in my possession somewhere, on and off for years. And so when the house was finally finished, I'm like, this is it. It's the opposite of chaos. It's calm, it's relaxing, it's serene. This is it. And so that's sort of where the sort of the opposite of chaos handle comes from. And it's just,
Yeah.
again, it's one of those weird little things that just sort of happened.
I love that. What I'm hearing is actually just reflecting in your stories, you're saying all of this. I feel like your life in some way, some of those steps along the way, there's been a lot of guidance. You've known that you've wanted something or something resonated with you, but you didn't know what it was at the time. And
Yeah.
then you sort of trusted the process along your journey and you've made decisions and then you found, oh, that's not the right one, but actually this opportunity came up after that and this is actually way better. And then understanding where all the pieces are fitting in. And it's really beautiful to sort of see and hear about, those steps on your path where you've had guidance, you've trusted, and things have worked out much better than, what maybe the original plan was or whatever it might be. And I just
Yeah.
love that reminder. Yeah.
And I always say I'm really lucky, but I get told off quite a lot by people. It's not
Yeah.
luck when you plan and you
Yeah.
work really hard and you go in a certain
Agree.
direction. That's not luck. Like, it's funny that
Agree.
you work, the luckier you're getting. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good point. Like, I still do feel lucky, blessed. Like, it does take, an effort you do have to, set the wheels in motion and plan the dream, I guess.
Absolutely. I feel like, and whatever anyone believes in, I feel like there's this balance between kind of knowing what you want to do and where you're headed, putting the steps in to get there, and then also not trying to control how things are going to turn out, and trusting and sort of following that inner guidance, that intuition that we all have access to. But you're right, like it's not like you're just kind of sitting back and it's all happening and unfolding in front of you. You are taking those steps and you are putting in that action. So I agree with you. I don't really believe in luck either. It's okay if people do, and that's fine. But yeah, I definitely hear you in that. Is your website, so is it the opposite of chaos? Is it .com or .com.au?
I think it's .com. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that's okay. We can double check that, and we'll put a link in the show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com, and also for your, I think it's just mainly Instagram that you've got your account as well. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely the opposite of chaos. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, cool. Well, Vicki, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. It's been really great to get to know more of your story and to share the tiny house love with people. And I just really appreciate you being here. So thank you again.
You're very welcome, and thanks for asking me on. It's been great.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like we could talk for a long time.
I know.
Like I have a similar feeling with Joe at LJM. So yeah, it's been really great to have you here. And if you're listening to us at home, make sure you go check out what Vicki is doing. Again, those links will be at tinyhouseconversations.com. And stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations. We'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.